welcome to the Amiga Ireland podcast. This time we've got something a little different. Between our usual episodes, we are going to be releasing interviews, and we have some really interesting interviews lined up. With me today is Luke.
Hello.
And Rob.
Hello.
And today we're actually going to interview Rob. Rob, you are our first interviewee. The honour.
There you go.
Rob is an author for Amiga Future magazine. He is a hardware and software developer who has developed for Amiga. And he hosts robthenerd.com, which is a website I'd encourage everyone to go and check out. Thanks for joining us, Rob.
No problem.
Right, off we go then. Rob, what was your first computing experience then?
Back when I was a very young kid, my uncle had an Atari 800 XL. That was my first experience. Just playing the simple games that it had, and I thought this was amazing. And not long after that, the school library, they had some books on programming, and so I got to try out a little bits of programming on the Atari. But then they actually had a computer in the school, which was a BBC Micro, and I got to play with that a bit, and because I had shown a bit of interest, I became the computers guy. I must have been about 8 or so at the time. Spent a bit of time after school writing games and showing the teachers how to use it more as much as anything else. That was my introduction to computing, was basically that. And I never had one at home until much later. So this Atari 800 and the BBC in school, and some friends who had Commodore 64s, were the only kind of chance I had to try out all these programs that I'd kind of been writing on scraps of paper. And that was it.
Nice.
You contribute quite a bit to the Amiga scene in many ways at the moment, between articles you write, workshops that you run, software you create, and some hardware mods. And I'm just curious, how did you arrive at Amiga, and how come it's Amiga now that you're so dedicated to?
Well, that Atari 800 that I started out on, I eventually inherited that from my uncle when he moved on to some other computer. I think he moved on to a Super Nintendo or something like that. Nintendo or Super Nintendo, and I got the Atari. And so, been working away on that, and it was getting a bit long in the tooth at that stage. And, people had been talking about Amigas, and oh God, there's this amazing thing. I'd seen one, but it was well beyond my budget to ever sort of to get my hands on one. But there's a friend of mine in school. Shout out to Will if he's listening, probably not, but anyways. And he had an Amiga 1200. My Atari broke through some dodgy hardware experimenting, and I needed a new computer, so I ended up buying a second-hand Amiga 1200, and that was it. From then on, I still have that. It's sitting here beside me in a ridiculously expanded state. But, so that was it, and I've been using them ever since. Yeah, so it's obviously I have been using other computers as well in the meantime, but it's been using Amigas more or less constantly since then.
Great. Let's maybe jump away from computing. Can you tell us, what do you do for a living? Currently,
I'm working with a medical device company in Scotland. They develop vascular implants, stents and grafts and that sort of thing. So sort of a mechanical engineering kind of job. So I work on a development team, and we work on projects for designing new grafts and improving the existing ones.
And what are your hobbies? Do you, outside of Amiga, do you have any others?
Yeah, well, too many hobbies for the amount of time I have, to be honest. There's a lot of hardware stuff, software stuff. There's the beyond computers. Quite into my photography. I like my cars, so I like looking after my car, working on my car. Travel, I love travelling. Then the usual ones, reading, music, drinking. Yeah, that's the usual stuff an Irish guy would put on a CV.
Nice.
What kind of Amiga related projects do you work on at the moment, Rob? Or in general?
In general, the projects that kind of software-wise and hardware-wise tend to be small things that, sort of small improvements. Like at the moment, I'm working on an update for SMB Mounter, which is a front end to make it easy to mount Windows shares on the Amiga. So that's a couple of small bugs and a couple of improvements I'm making to that at the moment. So that's kind of it on the software side. Hardware-wise, I'm actually at the moment drawing up plans for a clock port splitter. So if you've ever had a 1200 and tried to expand it too much, you'll know exactly how good that can be or how useful that can be. So it's something I built years ago, and my schematic for it is March 2002. So that'll give you an idea of that I built one for my own 1200, but never actually sort of formalized it on an actual manufactured PCB. So my original prototype is still here, still working, but it said there seem to be a few people looking for them, so I'll throw together some plans for one and maybe make up some boards if people wanted to solder them together themselves. So that's kind of what I'm working on now. I have a long-term project that I've been working on forever, which is like an MP3 jukebox based on an Amiga 1200, and that's constantly being worked on. So hardware-wise, it's more or less finished, but there's always bits to do on the software end.
Cool.
That's really, really, really nice, especially the long run project as well. Talking about other things, you ran a soldering workshop at Amiga Island 1217.
I did indeed. Yeah,
I think it was as popular as the Sensible Soccer event, and. Did you expect that kind of, response? Some people even, say that it was even more popular than the programming or even music workshops.
Wow. I didn't. I honestly didn't.
You didn't?
Because, my impression is that you get sort of maybe the vast majority of people are into playing the retro games and moderately expanding things, and then you get a few more people who are into making music and graphics and programming, and then at the very sort of narrowest end of the scale you get people who are actually into soldering and that end of things. But I know a few people have always asked, and sort of I've given people a hand and saying, oh, I wish I could do that and stuff. So that's where I was coming from with it, but I didn't expect it to be as popular as it was now, which is impressive, or to run on as long as it did. There's a lot of people kept on coming over during the day and over and back and going and playing Sensible Soccer and coming back to me, and I was quite impressed.
Were you attending any previous Amiga Island meetings before?
I was at the first one, which was the previous summer. I was at that one, and it was I didn't run a workshop or anything.
What about the ones in the past? Did you have any opportunity to
No, there were some Amiga user groups in Ireland, and back in the day, and I only caught the tail end of that, and there were a few people who had been, I was on the mailing list and stuff like that, but never actually went to a meetup, and it sort of eventually sort of fizzled out, and they weren't having regular meetings anymore by the time I got my Amiga, and just the occasional kind of meetup in the pub, and that was it. And then it was dying out, and I kind of took over their website for a while, but that was kind of the extent of my involvement. I never actually met the guys in person, so some of them were quite big names back in the day again, like the guys, Snoop Doss. The guy,
very useful tool, very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone should have it. But that guy lives not too far from me in Ireland. Eddie Carroll, I think was his name. But yeah, he was in that original group. But I never met the guy, and it all sort of fizzled out from there. But sort of for a while, it felt like I was the only guy in Ireland with an Amiga. But there you go. It seems to have picked up again now, and it's great to see.
Rob, how do you feel about the current status of the Amiga flavours, and do you have a personal favourite?
I have a personal favourite, but I'm not, sort of a religious kind of zealot of some of them as some people seem to be. I think you can't really have a discussion in general about the different flavours without starting an argument with someone. But I prefer to use OS4 over the others. But I have an Eros setup here. I have a Morphos machine, which I'm looking at now, and I have the OS4 machine, and I have a half a dozen classics lying around the place as well. So I use them all, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and they all have the things that I like about them and the things that I dislike. But for most of my development work, I work on my OS4 machine. Okay. And that's also what I use for writing the Amiga Future articles.
Talking about development and developing, what's the most exciting developments currently from your perspective? You have a lot of experience.
I don't know, there's always more to learn, isn't there? But current developments, what I'm really looking forward to is seeing if it ever happens, an OpenOffice or LibreOffice port for OS4, and hopefully for the other flavours. But that would be really, really nice to see, and give a bit of a boost and a bit more of a reason for having these expensive machines and keeping them running. But there's a lot of stuff becoming open source now. All these old projects, and the vast majority of the time, nothing's going to come of it, or maybe some minor bug fixes. But even that in itself is a good thing. But it's nice to see these new games coming out and new developments like that. I wouldn't be the biggest gamer, but there's some of them like Tanks Fury, which is great fun to play. Things like that. It's always good to see new stuff coming out like that. Mm-hmm. But hardware-wise as well, I love that hardware development has reached a stage where it's easy enough for one person to do it, because heavy games development and heavy software development is beyond that stage now. You can't really develop a web browser from scratch by yourself. It just can't be done. Not one that will run at current standards anyway. And the same for an Office suite, same for an OS. You just can't do it by yourself. They're just too big and they're too involved at this stage. But the Amiga hardware, especially the classic Amiga hardware, is so nice because it's kind of the last platform that you can kind of understand all by yourself. You can understand what's going on inside it. You can understand, you can look up your books and your tables and see what the registers are doing and read about them. And it is complicated, but I can get my head around that. And that's kind of probably, I'd say, the limit of what my head can get around. So, so making hardware for that is nice, but it's nice that hardware, that's what I was going to say, it has reached a stage with FPGAs and things like that people can do really, really interesting things with homebrew hardware. It's never been cheaper or easier to make your own PCBs, especially, complicated stuff that was, 10 years ago was beyond people basically. And now you've got things like, you've got like 3 or 4 homebrew accelerator projects on the go, including the obviously the Vampire, which is a huge deal. The FPGA one, but you've also got like the Furia accelerator and the Terrible Fire accelerators, and these are being done by 1 or 2 people, and that was impossible 10 years ago, and it would have been utterly unheard of 20 years ago when commercial accelerators were still available. So that's really exciting for me, and that's it's great to see that.
Thank you. Thanks.
This might be a difficult question to ask someone on the spot, but if you had to pick a favorite demo, mod, game and app, just one of each, what would they be?
See, this is the thing. I'm not really into the demo scene. I stick some on occasionally, and especially if I'm having a games night or something like that. Well, I'm waiting on people to arrive, and we're just sitting there having a few drinks and chatting. But I have the demos running in the background.
I'm pretty sure you know State of the Art, Spaceballs.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and Jesus on Ease, and there's probably the 2 big ones that I would run. I don't really have a favourite, but they to be fair, they're probably the front runners because they're sort of the go-to ones that you stick on when, just to do a bit of showing off, or even just to have on in the background when people are chatting away about other stuff and getting drunk. That's it. Or already drunk is even better, Mods, it's not something that I'd ever really have, listened to much. I listened to some of them, and friend Will, who actually wrote some mods, and he downloaded some of them at the time, and you listen to them, you think, oh, that's very impressive. But I wouldn't have had favourites, and just like I listened to it really well, or listened to it a few times, and that'd be it. So I couldn't even name a mod, which is terrible. And it's sort of a whole scene that I'm missing. But it's from I suppose from an early stage. I was streaming MP3s and listened to online radio, and that was kind of the thing. Back when I was in college, I got an 060 for the first time. Between that and getting the college broadband, it meant I could listen to online radio on my Amiga, which was like it was massive. It was a new thing. Yeah. It was a new thing in general. This was the year 2000, 2001. It was kind of a new thing everywhere, relatively speaking, and it was great to sort of be able to do that. So I kind of skipped the mods bit altogether. Apart from some of the music that came with games was nice, and I'd sometimes rip that off the discs and just save it on my hard drive and play it from there. The Super Fetal Leg music I remember in particular, the sax solo and that, and some of the music from Colonization I listened to separately from the game, but apart from that I didn't really listen to much. Now, what was their games? All-time favourite would probably be Frontier. And that's just unbelievable game.
Very
unbelievable
good
game.
one.
I played that from whenever I got the Amiga in like mid-90s all the way up to, I was still playing that in 2005. So probably playing it for about 10 years on the same machine. And I still have the save and I still fire it up occasionally. But and now I've got the 4th installment in the Elite series that I play now on the PC. But that was a great game. Great game.
Have you heard the radio drama called Escape Velocity?
I haven't, no.
Okay, it's a podcast you can download, and basically it's set in the frontier world. Commander Thane and stuff. It's absolutely brilliant. It's well worth checking out.
I'll have to look that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's because that whole world has there's a lot. There are novels and all sorts, and massive fan fiction things and wikis of the background lore and all this. It's a big thing.
Yeah, this one is done like professional actors and professional audio sound engineers and stuff. So it's
I'll have to give that a look. All right. Yeah, brilliant. Actually, just on the games thing, my record for the longest sitting playing a single game is Worms, and I played that. I remember bringing the 1200, went to a friend's place, and we were having a staying over kind of party, staying up all night kind of thing, and 13 hours. 4 of us played Worms for.
Very addictive game.
Oh, it was, and we were all very competitive, and it had a few cans, and basically still playing when the sun came up. And that's my record.
Fantastic.
There you go.
Right, how about an app? That's the last thing.
Oh yeah. I really like Blitz Basic, and I've always liked Blitz Basic from the very start. When I got the 1200, I was kind of like, I'm going to need something to move on from the Atari, and so I got a demo of Blitz Basic on one of the magazine cover discs, and then I was like, oh no, I have to get this. So I bought the full thing and still have it. But and that's evolved, and Ami Blitz 3 is the open source, and it's kind of evolved into a pretty impressive IDE, and it's great to use. I really enjoy using that. But as regards something smaller off the shelf, I don't know really. There's a lot of sort of small things that I use all the time. Personal Paint is probably one of them. And I still use that for the odd bit of making a GIF animation or something like that. It's still relevant and still usable for modern day stuff in that sense.
We're going to ask you about some numbers now, Rob. So can you tell us how many computers actually do you have?
Right, I'm going to look here. There. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Are you actually counting?
5, 6. I'm turn around in my chair. 7, 8, 9 in this room. Another 2 in the living room, and then I've got at least 1 at home, and that's not counting consoles. But that's computers, home computers, and PCs and that.
Yeah.
3 of them would be PCs that are 2 Linux and 1 running Windows. And then I got the OS4 Amiga 1. Got that's PC also runs AROS. I've got my old 1200. I've got a couple of other 1200s. 9, 10, 11. I suppose. There you go.
Nice
Not
collection.
All of them are fully working, but
nice collection anyway.
Yeah. One of them is sitting here in a million bits. It's a 500 plus that I was restoring, and it's working, but it doesn't have a case. But that counts, I suppose.
Rob, do you use your Amiga on a daily basis, any of them?
Almost daily, yeah. Yeah, I would say so. I spent, it's a bit of time writing my my Blitz tutorials, and so, that's something I generally have the machine running, and I'll spend a little bit of time working on it, or a little bit of time, developing the actual code that's in it, that's in the articles. So that's constantly running, I suppose, more or less. Like, there are days when I wouldn't use any computer, but that machine probably gets the most use out of all my machines. And then I've got a couple of 1200s that are in the living room that don't get regular use, as in daily, but they're, sometimes get some heavy use when there's a gaming night on or something like that, and they'll be on for a good 12 hours or so as well. But that would get pretty regular use for 1 or 2 of the main ones. And if I'm away, I'd usually bring I have an iBook with Morphos on it, and that would probably get fairly heavy use for a couple of days, and then it gets put back on the shelf when I'm home again for a while.
Right, I'm sure you're interested in NG system, but if you were to divide, like, in percentage of time that you actually spend with an NG system, how much would it be, like 50% on a classic Amiga and 50% on NG system, or 40-60, 70-30?
I would say about 70-30 to the NG system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's a lot nicer to work on that as my because I have the all my documents and stuff set up, and it's a lot quicker to work with it when it's all there. It just even just compiling is quicker on that than on my 1200 with the 060. So it's just, even though it's all working in 68k code and 68k programs, it still runs a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure people would argue that WinUAE would be quicker again, and it is, but that has its place as well, because I use that for testing code that I don't have hardware set up for, like different CPUs and FPU list systems and things like that. But in general, I spend most of the time on the OS4 machine, and then sort of the last couple of miles will be done on the 1200. Or if I'm writing something that needs the chipset specifically, I'll do it on the 1200, and then I'll spend a lot of time on it. But in general, it'll be 70-30 to the OS4 machine.
And with regard to programming, what kind of advice would you give to somebody who'd like to get started in the Amiga scene?
Get stuck in. I don't know if there's anything. If you've never programmed anything before, there is a lot of stuff out there, and it can be a bit daunting at first. But there are lots of tutorials, and there's lots of code out there that people have done before you that you can read and pull apart, and it'll take a while, but you just stick at it until something will click and you start to get the concepts, and then you're sorted. Then it's just a matter of learning more and more techniques. Once the basic concepts click, then you can program. And that's it. And don't get put off very early. Just stick with it, and whatever language it is, like BASIC is really, I think that's a great language to begin with. But there are arguments for other languages as well. Bliss BASIC in particular comes with a really good manual. It can be confusing, but it did a lot of detail in it, and it does come with some good examples that you can have a look at and start playing with just to see what effect it has. It's a good starting point. C is arguably a better language, but it can be a little bit tricky to start off, because unless you have a good environment, it's either sort of a little bit old, and it involves a little bit more of the command line, which you might not be familiar with as well, and so you end up trying to learn 3 or 4 different skills at the same time. Whereas if you've a nice environment set up, and that's what Blitz gives you, you just have to start typing and you just have to do the program. You don't have to worry about anything else. So I think that's a good starting point.
Okay.
And can you tell us what are your future plans regarding new apps? Of course, if it's not a secret. I've got like dozens of things that I've written a skeleton for, and then got distracted by something else. And let me think. So you've got some, like projects on hold right now, yeah?
Yeah. Or projects where I've got the bare bones done.
Oh,
like I have an MP3 player, the software for my jukebox, but I kind of based it on very, very loosely on the sort of the interface that iTunes has, and I wrote a standalone MUI version, which is kind of like 90% finished, but I haven't released it because it's still quite buggy, and there are other similar things. Yeah, it just needs me to sort it out, really. But it's because it's such a big and heavy chunk of software. It's like I don't have, I can't. I don't have the motivation at the moment to sit down with the amount of time that it needs when I've got all these other little things that I could be fixing or doing. So that's one that I should really do and release. I did have a plan for a cross-platform battleship game, which was a cross-platform, so it played over network. And just very simple, but, with a couple of tweaks to the classic battleship game, as in, things like area of effect weapons and moving ships, but still turn-based and still grid-based. But, I thought, get an Amiga version running and an Android and a PC version and have them all be, platform agnostic would be quite nice. So that's something that I've just done basically 2% of the programming of. Loads of little plans, nothing to show for them, but yeah, someday.
Great, we look forward to them.
Cheers.
Do you think Amiga can return to mainstream ever?
Not really, and not in the state it's in now. I think, it could, in theory, by changing itself completely, but that's not why we like it, So stick a badge on a PC that says Amiga, and then you got an Amiga that's mainstream. But it will be running Linux or Windows or whatever, and that's not really the same thing. I don't think so. I think it can have its own healthy little niche, like things like the haiku community. Well, Linux is a bit of an extreme example because that is pretty huge. But like haiku and React OS, and there are these communities based around hobby OSs, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing to aim for. You don't need to be sort of mainstream to be successful. As it is, and if it manages to grow a little bit every year, then that would be great, and that's what you should be aiming for, really.
That's an interesting view, to be honest. And do you think Amiga interest will sustain into the next generation?
That is a good question. I know my little brother, he kind of cut his teeth on my Amiga. He's 12 years younger than me. Hi Tim, if you're listening. He got into computing basically, I would say, because he was using my Amiga, and when he was only like 4 or 5 years old, and he was using a mouse and drawing things and launching his programs and stuff like that, it got him used to having a desktop environment, and sure, that set him up, and he always had sort of a vague interest in it. So I think, and he has a thing now where he's interested in games not because they're the next big thing or because they're super modern looking or anything, but because of the playability. And I'd like to think he got that from playing, things like Dune and Worms and things like that on the Amiga. But I think, I think there's always going to be sort of a niche market for that kind of thing, a niche interest. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. Especially with retro being all the rage these days, you probably get people who've never seen an Amiga before, born after Amiga went bust, who are getting interested in it. Incidentally, that's when my brother was born. It's 1994, so the fact that he knows it and likes it is impressive.
Do you have a preference between developing for hardware or software?
No, I think they both have their things, and sometimes you get an itch for one or the other. And like say right now, I should really be bug fixing in one of the programs that I have out there, and I was working on that, and then I just said, no, I feel like drawing a circuit board, so that's what I'm going to do. And so sometimes you just get in the mood for one or the other, and because I think I like my kind of thing, and my previous job was developing electronics that had hardware and software elements to them, and firmware elements, boards that went into medical devices and analyzers. So, and that was kind of exactly my thing from college, if you know what I mean. Like that was exactly what I liked in college, and that's what I was doing. It was nice while I was doing it, but so it's kind of, I see them as sort of just two arms of the same thing. I like to write firmware as well, low-level stuff, and that's another project I'm working on actually that I should really finish, was a wireless joystick controller. It's a box that you plug your two joysticks and a keyboard and a mouse into, and you plug it in another box into all those various ports on the Amiga, and it just does it as if it's connected. So I've been working on that, and that I was really enjoying the firmware aspect of that, and then it just got put on hold for something else. I can't remember now what, but I almost picked that up as well. But I like them all, and I kind of don't see them as being that different. You're using different tools, but at the end of the day, you're manipulating something to your will, effectively. That's nice, and that's what I like.
Regarding software development, do you think that we will ever have a fully modern browsing experience on Amiga?
How do you define modern? Because if you look at, I've got one Linux machine that's running 32-bit version of Linux, and apparently that's out of date. That's got an out-of-date browser on it. It's only about 2 years out of date. Or it was only released about 2 years ago. So modern changes all the time, and we do have browsers that can handle, especially on the NG systems, browsers that can handle HTML5 and can handle all the heavy JavaScript sites. They move from there at the same time, and you're constantly left behind. So it's more a case of just finding someone or a group of people who are dedicated enough to be able to put in the time to keeping the ports in line and keeping the ports updated. We have modern browsers capable of doing the modern things, but that's kind of a snapshot of possibly 3 years ago. And if you count that as modern, it's definitely modern compared to the likes of iBrowse and AWeb, which were kind of left behind when CSS came in. But they'll do for a lot of things. It's a moving target basically, and I don't think we have the manpower to keep on that unless something significant changes. We'll always be a couple of years behind.
Rob, slightly tangentially, what other things do you associate, if anything, with Amiga, like, from TV shows or music or films or anything like that?
How about, do you remember, for example, Amiga 1000 from Miami Vice?
Oh, yeah. Big thing for me, is always the Babylon 5 references and the Star Trek references from, doing the pilot modelling and all that kind of stuff that they did for them. When you see a guru meditation on a website or something like that, and you kind of think, that's because whoever wrote that back end was an Amiga guy. And you'd find references here, there and everywhere. You come across them quite regularly, actually. I always remember the stories from Star Trek 4 where Commodore wanted to charge them to put an Amiga in their, in the air quotes present day, whereas Jobs in his infinitely better business mode said, no, here have an Apple. And that was like whatever $2,000 less than the Amiga would have cost the producer. So guess which one they went with, even though it looked massively inferior, with its black and white flickery screen and stuff. And you just think
7-inch
the Amiga could
screen,
have,
7, I think
that's it. The Amiga could have run rings around that with a nice colourful animation, but sure, there you go. I don't think there's anything really that reference, apart from obviously Amiga specific things, and any kind of when you see something that's being done with modern day software and you think, that started out in Amiga, or Worms, or any of the games that kind of kicked off then, and you can kind of think, right, that harks back to Amiga times, and like even Command and Conquer kind of games, and all by Westwood Studio, sensible soccer type games, and there's all this interest in that, and you think, that was there back in the day.
Another question. So, what in your opinion, what makes Amiga? For example, some people claim that it's not Amiga if you change hardware architecture. Some say it should have, the official OS. What's your opinion about that?
Yeah, that's it's another one of these that's always going to cause an argument,
Yeah.
I remember having a discussion with a guy who actually, refused to believe that anything that didn't have a Paula chip on it was an Amiga, because Paula was the only part that was common between all the machines.
Yeah.
And even though it's a different part number in the different machines and there's a different pinouts, that was his thing. And I think everyone has their own definition. But for me, it's a lot tied to the OS, but the OS became what it was because of the hardware. So there's always going to be, when you're programming it, you're always going to see certain structures and things that are the way they are because it was originally for the original hardware. So the classics will always the definitive Amiga hardware, and that they obviously reach a certain point and then they are no more. So that's them, and that is the original Amiga hardware, but it wouldn't be that without the OS, and you can run Linux on the Amiga hardware, and it won't be the same experience because it's Linux.
Well,
not that there's anything wrong with that, but because it's not the same multitasking, it's not the same. It's tied so closely to the hardware. So it's really both, but the OS carries a lot of that legacy on and behaves in much the same way on modern hardware. If you kind of ignore the bits where it doesn't.
And what about, the new FPGA boards like Vampire 500 and Vampire 600? Do you think that this is actually the future of Amiga?
Well, I think so. And
at least classic Amiga.
Well, yeah, that's it. And like I said, it's stuff that wasn't possible 10 years ago, and it's great that people are able to do this because it can be done as a hobby. And I think it is the way to do it because it's going to be cheaper to develop, and there are people who can spend that kind of time and come up with results. Now it's not perfect, and it has its problems as well, but there are also people who are working on things like old G3 accelerators for Macs and getting them running in PCI in like mediator based Amigas and things like that. So it's not the only thing that isn't sort of 100% original that's sort of being worked on, and I think it's great, and that it won't, the purists will always want the original thing, but then you let them work away with their floppy drives and and waiting 10 minutes between levels and games. That's I'm exaggerating, of course, but everyone will have their own thing for it. But for a lot of people who are looking to actually use it for software development or whatever, even developing new games that are sort of heavier on resources, then that's a good thing. Yeah, and as far as classics are concerned, there's not a lot else that you can do because, the CPUs and what we're seeing as the next gen CPUs, the PowerPCs for the classic are all dead ends. So, all you can do is just sort of either re-implement the same thing or, run the same thing again. So the only way to improve on that, keeping the classic, is to go the FPGA route.
Rob, most of us have had 20, 30 plus years of Amiga memories behind us at this stage. What are your fondest memories?
Wow. Good question. Early enough on when I got the 1200 first, and I didn't really, I'd seen Amigas used before, but I hadn't really used them at that stage. And it's just kind of, just having so many kind of like mini epiphanies, like, oh my god, I can't believe that works like that, and that's fantastic how it works, and that's a brilliant idea, and how can I do this and do that and do that without the whole thing grinding to a halt? Because at the time I was using Windows 3.1 machines, and I'd been using like 386s and 486s, and they struggled pretty much with opening a couple of different programs. And even though I had a basic 1200 and I could open a word processor and switch back to the desktop instantly without having to watch the icons redraw, I thought, this is unbelievable, and things like that. And being able to just being able to do things like that where you're in charge of the computer and you're not waiting on the computer to sort shit out, that was kind of like, wow, this is amazing, unlike anything else that was around at the time. And still, I've got a pretty heavy duty machine in work for doing lots of CAD and 3D modeling stuff, and I still sit there thinking, oh, for God's sake, why are you doing this? Why can't you just leave that window where I put it? Why can't I just move you out of the way because I want to get at this one? This just gets in your way, and it's sort of like a breath of fresh air even now. But when I was learning all that stuff, it's like, oh my god, that's amazing. That's brilliant. It was just that's it.
I love it. I love it. Rob, thanks so much for joining us.
Not at all.
If anyone wants to follow any of Rob's developments, he's still writing for Amiga Future magazine, and there's a great programming tutorial underway there, and you can find his other developments on robthenerd.com. Is that right?
That's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, Rob.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Okay, everybody, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.